Welcome, and thank you for attending and watching our session about digital end-to-end collaboration. This afternoon we have a fantastic panel discussing digital end-to-end collaboration, sharing their insights into what this means for existing and new workflows. May I introduce you to Damien Carroll, Chief Operating Officer at Cernet. Then we have Mark Allen, Managing Director of True North Productions. And then we have Mark Harrison, Controller of Production at BBC North. And finally, Brian Ardman, Director of Operations at Farm North. So what do we actually mean by collaboration? What is collaborative digital technology? What is digital end-to-end collaboration? To some of these concepts may seem like buzzwords or esoteric phrases to you. This session will help solidify some of these concepts and the real-world considerations around these so-called buzzwords. We often forget we have been collaborating for more than 30 years via FTP, sharing files, and even email. But is this really collaboration in the 21st century? Production by its very nature is a highly collaborative environment, supplemented by post-production being very much on-present within a set, combined with remote review and approval. Surely this has to be some form of digital collaboration. Facilities creating and moving and exchanging projects in-house between other sites and facilities via high-performance secure networks, this has to be collaboration at its finest. Uploading content to the cloud, ingesting, logging in the cloud, editing from anywhere in the world with a reasonable connection, this must be digital end-to-end collaboration. The answer to all of these is absolutely yes, in various degrees of depth and integration. In reality, these are established examples of collaboration, albeit traditional screen-to-screen, technology used to speed up processes, or remote infrastructure used to scale up and down in accordance with demand. During this session, the panel will provide an insight into the various areas of collaboration, the benefits of challenges of embracing digital integration and end-to-end workflows. But before we start, how many of you are currently using some form of collaborative digital end-to-end technology or service? Put your hands up. Just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, keep your hands up. How many of you would like to be more collaborative? No one? Oh, right, okay, just a few more people. And I presume the rest of you are just collaborative curious. Okay, right, okay. So, moving on. Our first question of the day. From your perspective, the panel, what are the biggest challenges facing the industry, albeit collaborative creativity, collaborative technology, or a collaborative audience? And I'll pass that one on to Mark Harrison.
Thanks for that hospital pass. That's absolutely. So we began, and an hour later he finished talking his first answer. Okay, let's get the first one out of the way. I've done quite a bit of work for the Digital Production Partnership, which I chair, which people may know of. Digital Production Partnership, yes, between ITV, Channel 4, BBC, looking at creativity, specifically to answer this question about to what extent we think there are opportunities, there are creative opportunities through having more collaborative, more integrated end-to-end digital tools. And the answer is actually there's very little. There's very little demand in that space. In fact, although in the BBC we can point to lots of examples of teams, particularly from different departments, doing great stuff together around ideas, the instincts of the individual creative person are not to collaborate with the person in the next team beside them. I think that's not where the creative impulse comes from, and I think it's often overstated. There's an overstated assumption that creative people want to collaborate. And out of that, you sometimes get an overstated emphasis upon supposed tools, workflows, technologies that would enable that and therefore deliver benefits. But in fact, nobody really wants to do it. There are no benefits, so don't spend the time on the technology. The real opportunities, I think, are much more around the kind of the business process aspect of making this move to digital smoother, because and I'm sure other people will talk about this, and particularly Mark, who's in the thick of it, is that you cannot overstate what a change this is in becoming fully file-based, and largely it's a nightmare. And it throws up all sorts of brand new problems around some very old practices of how we tell stories and gather material to tell stories. So if we can find ways to collaborate around process and around technology that will smooth that out, then I think potentially there's massive benefit. And and this is will be my final point, I think the really moot point there, and it's one that we try and address in the DPP, is how you bring about sufficient collaboration to make everything smoother and easier and simpler, without taking away the potential for those who play in that area to make money by competing. So the very people providing the tools, technologies, processes, workflows to make it simpler also need to make money, and they'll make money by being distinct. So how do you maintain that distinctiveness while also bringing the benefits of collaboration?
Very good. Okay.
Do you want
anyone
else? Yeah, go on.
Do you want my
Go
in
on.
the thick of it
Go
sort
on.
of thing? I think Mark's right with regards to overstating, etc. I mean, from our perspective, the one thing that you mainly want to do is as much as you are pushing the collaboration and how technology can help you be more creative and get more on screen, the last thing you want is to have it stopping people being creative or being the thing that stops them getting creativity on screen. So it's almost like a good ref. You don't notice they're there if it's done its job well. You know, it's really as simple as that. So from our point of view, you know, from a sort of nose to tail production process, when people are out shooting and filming and so on and so forth, then this whole technology piece and the collaboration comes all the way to the fore, because at the point of acquisition, you want it to be right. Because if it's not, you're just piling up a bunch of problems that are going to hit you down the end of the road. You're going to have very expensive, creative, wonderful, lovey people in an edit trying to work out where the audio is for their file, or what codec this was shot in, or why is that like that, or why have they got to grade everything because they didn't understand that once you transcoded some of it. So take out all of the obstacles, all of the glitches that's going to stop the creative side. That's the benefit, or that's what technology is going to be able to deliver into the process. It's basically going to liberate. Now there are some other things, and we mentioned, you know, some technological sort of shooting aids, some of these cameras and wonderful sort of flying helicopter buggy sort of thing. Wonderful. We'll make some beautiful programs out of that. But you know, there are so many different types of program that we're trying to make, from a property program where we'd love a flying helicopter to a structured reality fixed rig plus PSC crews where we're creating, you know, tens and tens of terabytes of material that all needs to marry up and not disrupt that editing process when you've got a deadline that's absolutely running up behind you. So I think that the main collaboration is in bringing a few extra tools, but then streamlining and very much simplifying the whole process so as not to allow technology to overbear and spoil the creativity. So how much it can actually aid it, you know, we see in many different ways of CGI, so it can aid it in some incredible ways. But on quite a purely practical, factual level, then it's about enabling rather than actually driving the creativity, I'd say.
Yeah.
I think I'd like to take a step back a bit and look at, as Mark said, we ploughed into this file-based world 3-4 years ago, and everybody at the sharp end knew that we were staring down a very dark tunnel with a train coming towards us at a high speed of knots, and there was going to be carnage along the way, and we've seen an awful lot of carnage along the way. And I remember doing one of these sessions at BVE in London about 3 years ago, highlighting then some of the problems that we could foresee coming up, and I've been proved right. But I think a lot of those issues were caused by a total lack of collaboration on the manufacturer's side of things. I think at that time, every camera stand had the perfect solution for digital workflows, but it stopped as soon as it came out of the camera. And being at the sharp end in post-production, as a lot of people here will know, the collaboration at that point was awful between camera manufacturers and everybody else in the chain. Now, there's been a lot of I'm old enough to remember a number of industry collaboration attempts over the years, and a lot of that is around standardization, around OMF, AAF, all that, which all had the right intention. But the biggest problem, as Mark alluded to along the way, has always been commercial interest to some extent, and getting kit out the door, or on the provider side, people shrink wrapping services that are only within their domain. I think that takes me on to, okay, so where are we now? And where are we now? I think a lot of those issues have been identified, and this is where I congratulate Mark on the work that the DPP have been doing, because it needs to take an agnostic view of not only the creative collaboration issues that we've talked about, but also the technical, and more importantly from the sharp end where I am, the technical collaboration issues. And that is about forcing through standardization to some extent, but standardization in workflows, and specifically the challenges now that the DPP have identified around the delivery piece as well as the front end piece. So I think we're making huge strides, and the great work that the DPP has done has been about taking that umbrella organisation view across the creative piece and the supplier piece, the manufacturer's piece, and literally knocking heads together in many cases, because it has been grief. The last 3 years in production, we've all probably got horror stories of massive amounts of data that have been put at risk for various. When we plug that into that, it doesn't work, and poor planning, etc., etc. And that, but we've been driven into that by technology, and that brings me on to just my final point at this stage, which is about education. A key point of the DPP thing, and Mark's not paying me for this, by the way, but is about the education piece and getting educating the marketplace. And the marketplace, primarily from what I see, is not the people sat here, because I actually believe in many ways the people sat here are probably the converted. It's the people who are not sat here, and it's the people who actually don't attend all the DPP events. That's the challenge, is getting out to those people, and primarily in those people, what I'm talking about, very busy production managers. I think that's where a lot of the problems I foresee in the field in production today is that production managers are running to stand still, and bringing. It's all very well having technologists saying, "Oh, this is wonderful. We'll go and shoot on this, and it'll be all marvelous." But production managers are left in this sea of confusion, and I think there's a massive effort that we all have. I'm not a production manager. But I'm very sympathetic towards their cause at the moment, because they've lived through the last 2 or 3 years with trying to manage traditional. And this comes back to another DPP piece, which is on budgets, because they've been trying to manage traditional budget templates as well. And the DPP have done some work around new budget templating, which is really important, I think. So I think the education piece is the biggest challenge, and as well as getting the manufacturers and creatives to collaborate, I think. But the education piece, I think, is massive at the moment.
Excellent.
Yeah, so I'd probably just reinforce that we kind of highlight here that creatives don't want to collaborate, that manufacturers have vested interests. Everybody in the post-production or production supply chain, nobody does an end-to-end production from start to finish. It's organization to organization to organization who all have vested interests. And so it's trying to find the layers underneath production that are common, or the necessary evils, as Mark said, the referees in this game. And whether it's infrastructure layers where they're commodities that manufacturers' software can interact with in a kind of an open standard type of way, so that the tools that creatives use are still available to them. But it's collaboration at the infrastructure layer that I think is more kind of achievable in the kind of end-to-end workflows.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the other things that we see is, obviously with the collaboration, it's an opportunity to look at new ways of doing things. It's not about using the same process and then trying to apply it to a model, a digital end-to-end model. It's about looking at things fresh, because what you don't want to do is take those inefficient habits and then passing them onto a new way of doing things. So in relation to collaboration, does this actually affect the quality of the content itself?
I don't think it does, in as much as where you spend your effort and where you spend your time. what you'll usually find, what we find, is that it doesn't affect the output, but it affects the amount of effort that you have to put in to achieve the output. So, for example, if you've got technological challenges, you want to finish at a reasonable hour, but because you've been trying to make all of this stuff tie up, and you know, this thing of sort of creatives and you know, and or not, everyone that I work with, they always leave it all in the edit suite with regards to that part of their role, and they will deliver. No one will go, well, we've just had to compromise on the delivery because we didn't have the technology. It just means they'll work till 11 or 12 or 1 or 2, and we've all probably done it in our time. So I think what it will allow people to achieve the results, and then maybe even push beyond where we're at the moment with the results creatively, if they're able not to have to go that extra mile just to deliver it, if the technology is restricting that for any reason. And as you say, if you know, we have in-house post-production facilities, etc. So not even going from place to place to place, there are still clashes, there are still struggles, there are still problems when we've controlled nose to tail the whole production process pretty much. But so I think to that point, it can only improve it, but again, it's got to stop hindering it and allow people to deliver programs within the budgets that are being restrained and so on and so forth, more realistically, so we're not pushing too hard to achieve things because the technology is not allowing us to get there quickly enough.
I think that's the key. I think the danger, as we've seen, as technology change over the last 10 years, has been when you get it right. And a classic example of this is the way the very mature state of nonlinear editing, for example. That's in a very mature state now. So the benefits of that are now being seen in terms of cutting time and so the original intention with that, and where we are now with a more joined up end-to-end digital delivery, is that the content should be better on screen, because fundamentally you've saved time and effort in the process. What the practicality, as we all know, is that means the budgets get cut appropriately. So you're back to where you started, and that's the danger, and that's why potentially the content on screen, if people have got longer to be creative, then content on screen will be better. The practicality is, I'm back to, now I'm going to slam production managers, because what a production manager will look at is say, well, you said you can do it in 3 weeks instead of 5, so therefore that's what we'll pay for. So you end up back where you were, and that's the danger, I think. There is an end game that end-to-end can provide and make it all slicker. I think we're still, the challenge at the moment, one of the other going back to the previous question to some extent, but the biggest challenge at the moment is on the ground, if you like, is the final piece in the jigsaw, is the delivery piece that we're all working very hard with the DPP to get that piece right. There's going to be a lot of grief over the next 12 months in that area as well, but ultimately that will be lovely, but then it'll be interesting to see if the benefits of that will be shrunk again.
Okay.
There's no question that television is getting better, right? And the quality of work gets better and better all the time. But that is entirely because digital tools, yes, they do give you greater quality, and the commitment of people who work in production and people who work in post, everybody who services a production at every level, is excellence. I mean, that's why it's a fantastic industry like that, the commitment to excellence. I think it has almost nothing to do with collaboration in itself.
Yeah.
I think the other drivers are far more powerful.
Yeah, excellent. Okay. So in terms of the practical examples, can you give an example of where creative collaboration has actually worked very well and where it hasn't worked so well?
I think one of the slightly maturing technologies is the use. I mean, there's a lot of debate about the cloud, and these guys will go on for hours about it if you let them. But I think there's been notable successes with just the simple, on paper, the simple review and approval tools that are now available. And we've certainly worked on a number of projects where significant collaborative advantage has been gained at the early post-shoot, pre-edit, in terms of review and approval in a cloud or web-based area. Those are now, there's much more maturity in that market than there was 18 months ago. And that is truly, by nature, is truly collaborative and has helped significantly the creative process, I think. As we all know, and I think this is possibly what we'll come on to at some point, is the jewel in the crown is connectivity. And that'll be the ubiquitous utility that we all want to sort that piece out. But certainly I think its successes, there have been a lot of very large-scale projects that we can all quote, I'm sure, that have significantly benefited from the various tools that are out there that are now a much more mature market for that piece. I mean, I'm very focused on post, obviously, but that piece between camera and edit suite, I think there's been a lot of really good effort in that space.
Okay.
I mean, we've had ups and downs, and I think the thing that I would implore everybody is be patient. You won't nail it first time, and that's the whole thing about this. When you put a new bunch of things together, you're not going to nail it first time necessarily. We've been working on some projects recently, and we're bringing loads of new elements together. And it was a challenge. It was a challenge. There's no doubt about it. It was a mind-bogglingly difficult production. But what happened was, in fact, all of the technology piece is becoming a bit more homogenous. And in fact, you've got lots of expertise in post-production. We need it at the start. And we need to know. So in fact, it's like, okay, we tried this. That was a nightmare when we got there. So what do we do next time? Well, we make sure that will do that, so that will now plug into that, and that will work, and great, and off we go. But we could easily give up like that. And so when you're crashing all of these different types of media and different types of ways of working, you've got to be hardy, and you've got to be ready to test some stuff, because no one is going to come in with a silver bullet and just solve all of the problems, etc. And it will be hard miles, I think, over the next 12 months, not only in delivery, but again in all of this incredibly bubbly environment that everyone's got a solution, but no one's got the solution. And you've got to find that, and you've got to be incredibly patient around that, I think, because it's as you know, we do some MTV things where the shooting ratios and fixed rig and PSC cameras, and then you're in a nightclub with 5 kids running around, and where's the audio? Who's got it's really tough, and you've got to pull all of that together, and then put it out to 8 edits who have got a deadline that is right up against it with a rightly demanding broadcaster. But you've got to work at those things. You've got to work at them, and I wonder if anyone will have a magic answer, or if everyone's just going to have to forge their own way, and that's hard, because you're always finding new ways of doing things. You'll never settle on a path that is perhaps going to be the correct one.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen good examples of collaboration across on a networking perspective, when people are just moving content back and forward. We had a large feature film a couple of years ago that had 27 different post houses working on VFX shots at a particular time, all moving shots for a very strong deadline. That could only happen across kind of a network in that sort of way logistically. But that's just one layer of infrastructure. It's an important layer, but it's just one piece of it. We're starting to see people looking at storage in a similar type of way, of how you can kind of share resources on a storage platform and move content around with the kind of ownership of the billing relationship for who's managing the content or responsible for it, kind of moving from party to party, but the actual content staying on the same infrastructure. And we see this sort of movement being a way of driving cost out of the workflow, because what ends up happening generally is content moves from place to place and gets stored here and gets stored there and gets stored somewhere else. And I think that type of collaboration going forward, if the tool set allows it, because underneath the HUD, this is just infrastructure. The software tools and the people, that's where the creativity happens. The rest of it is just, it's just nuts and bolts, really.
So in your view, Damien, the creative benefit there is actually enabling more activity to happen for the money, essentially.
Yeah. I see it as less as a creative benefit, more as just the. I mean, there's a creative benefit in the sense that that the business or your guys don't have to worry about that stuff. You're not worried about the infrastructure layer, which detracts you.
But is
from
money being
creativity.
released from budgets to say
other
do
things.
more special effects or whatever? I mean, if that
Yeah,
if that film hadn't had.
Yeah.
Couldn't have had 27 post houses working together. Would it only have had 5 and been a less good film?
Yeah, in an ideal world, money will be released from the budgets to creativity. But to Brian's point, does that get hoovered back up by a production manager that says you're efficient?
Yeah.
I'm not sure on that.
Okay. I mean, one of the things on the collaboration side of things, the advantage is that instead of it being a sequential process, which is traditionally where we've all come from, more of a non-linear parallel set of processes, which means obviously productions can work a lot faster, and obviously the content can be pushed out a lot quicker as well. So in terms of collaboration, how does it actually relate to standardization and automation? I mean, is there any sort of need for standardization and automation, or is it an opportunity?
Well, I think that goes back to where we began, actually, and some of the things that Brian's been talking about. There's no question in my mind that standardization is a really important and necessary way of taking out some of the pain that just makes these great new tools generate so much complexity and so much time and effort, which is just about getting the damn thing done. So, something that Mark was talking about, but when we were talking earlier on before we came in here, was about having a great production with a great new camera. So you can shoot things in a completely new way. But if that camera's got a really non-standard codec, then you just have all this grief to then make the blooming stuff work. Now, if there was only one codec, that would be a beautiful thing. So I got no doubt that, and in the DPP we're spotting more and more areas where we believe that standardization or having common standards could really help. But again, to go back to my very first answer, I think we have to be careful about attempting standardization of the production process, which has been attempted at various times, because the fact of the matter is that the creative people want to do things differently. That's what creativity is. Oh, let's try it this way. Let's do it differently. And and in fact, the excellence of post houses over the years has been their ability to adapt to that difference and still make everything work. That's kind of the role almost of that sector of the industry. If you smooth that out, if you try and create something that's nice and neat and tidy, that works beautifully and is very, very efficient, you're taking out all those rough creative edges that make things different. And that's where I think we have to accept that production is going to be a messy business. It has to be a messy business, and it should be messy, full of difference, but not have any more complexity than it absolutely has to. It's a tricky balance.
Yeah.
I don't think it'll ever. I can't see how there's so much creativity in the creation of the technology as well that I don't see.
Sure, yeah.
No one's going to want to sit on their hands and go, right, we've done it. So actually, I think it's going to be such a struggle to try and get to an end game like that, where it's like, okay, it's fine because we start off with this 0 and 1 in this order, and it will come out a slightly rearranged, creative, sort of affected 0 and 1 at the other end. There's going to be so many different things that are going to pull into that.
And actually, sorry to come back in, but that's why it's worth separating out, as we increasingly are separating out in the DPP, production from delivery, storage, distribution. Don't see much benefit in having a huge amount of kind of variation in that latter part of the chain. That's where standardization is like, now you've finished it, now you've done the really different thing, made your thing unique and special, let's get it through the chain and out to audiences in the smoothest, most efficient, cheapest possible way. And we should see a distinction there, I think. Sorry, Damien.
Yeah, no, I fully agree, because that's the point where it becomes a supply chain. You know, the creativity is finished, so it is just get it out there, and it can be standardized at that point.
And I think the point I was making around, or the question around automation, is about the, how does that relate to collaboration, and how does it relate to becoming more efficient, and ultimately linking to the actual final output. What are your views on automation as part of the digital end-to-end collaboration, please?
That's a big question.
Carbon-based automation.
I mean, I think practically there is. Once we've smoothed out the next 12 months, I mean, we could have said this at any point over the last 10 years, I'm sure. But we are seeing this. I keep going back to the nuts and bolts of the delivery thing, which is obviously something that is top of my list at the moment. But once we've smoothed that out and it's become a de facto that everybody knows what's happening, and the actual, not only the file type issues, but actually the delivery mechanism issue, then it's very, and there's a lot of people on the show floor working on various tools in this area, but it is, I can fully foresee that we're going to be within 2 years we'll be in a position where we will be able to put an awful lot of automation around that back end process. And it's starting to happen. There are tools out there, but there's still a lot of grief, as I say, over the next 12 months. But I think certainly that side of it, you could be sat in an edit suite or anywhere, not just in a facility or anywhere, hit a button and it goes onto the transmission server, because all the back-end processes underneath that have been taken care of in an automated way. And we can see that jigsaw is starting to build now. And the DPP have really, the fact that they've actually got all the broadcasters sat in the same room at the same time was a significant piece in that work, as far as the UK is concerned. What's really interesting about the DPP thing is that I've seen there's a lot of talk in the US now about the DPP, which is really interesting. That the US broadcast infrastructure people and manufacturers are starting to say, oh, well, look what they've done. And actually, that's quite a neat model. And I think that's really interesting. But going back to the automation point, yeah, absolutely. I think, as Mark said, the more restricted the creatives become further up the chain, the less creative they're going to be, and they're going to kick against that. But the automation piece is definitely from, as soon as you've finished, I'm happy with it, deliver it. There's a lot of scope there.
Okay. So just talking about the futures, you spoke about the next 12 months, but typically which collaborative technologies and services do you think that we need in the future?
Aside of connectivity.
Aside from connectivity, yes.
Connectivity.
Yeah, I think connectivity.
Oh, excellent.
It works for you, doesn't it?
I think
and storage.
Storage. I think one of the things we discussed earlier on this is that you can't, what you want to be able to do in the traditional production center and in all the sharp end grief that Mark's going through, is to be able to be stood in a field and know that you can connect to send your rushes, you shoot them, they appear on Soho Net storage, that everybody can look at.
Other storage is available.
Other storage is available. I'm at least 2 beers up now, aren't I? I think. And everybody's got access to it, and anybody who needs to can edit it wherever they happen to be. And we're not that far off, but the big thing is the connectivity to solve that at the moment, I think.
Okay.
And the danger that comes with it is that if everyone can look at it, everyone will, and they'll all, and that's so there's some it's really.
They have a really good access rights model.
They have a really good. But even just as a working method, it's important that the protocols are sat alongside these things to ensure that that we don't just lose control. So I'm not sure if that's an automation thing or whatever it is, but the ways, as you're saying, the carbon-based automation, people will still need to understand a lot of this. Some people won't want to, and it's like I just prefer to work how I like to work, and other people will just go crazy with it. So it's important to have some real parameters in there as to if there is any sort of new technology or new ways of working or new availability, all of these things. But how do we work with it? It's great, there's a plane. I couldn't fly it though. We've got to know how you're going to use this piece of technology very carefully so that it does actually become a benefit and not a sort of not a challenge. But connectivity is still the most important thing. Come out.
I think that the one other area that could be significant is that there is this sense, particularly with small independent production companies, that every bit of TV you make is the first piece of TV ever made, isn't there? It's like there's a lot of processes that you do kind of once, and then because you've already got one production probably, and that stops, and then next time you do them again, and you've got no capital because you're just working on budget lines for your project. So you never get to invest. You never acquire the kind of scale to start to become more effective. And potentially, there could be, again, if we can get some of the connectivity right from the office environment, there's the potential for hosted services which are pay-as-you-go, which would enable producers and small and medium-sized production companies in particular to operate far more effectively, and actually to have access to some quite high quality sort of common services that could make them operate more on a par with some of their bigger competitors, and that could help them then in turn to grow.
And that's really important for diversity as well, of what you're able, if you're, because if you're not near something and you can't plug into it, you're on your own. You are, and you're gonna find that the smaller companies will just start to just shrink back into the ground. And especially out of London. Out of London's a big deal. Where are the big creative hubs? We turn over 10 million in Leeds, but we've but then you come over here, but we've not got the connectivity that we need in order to sustain. We're pushing at that, and it is really important to keep these little pockets of diverse specialists. Sometimes producers and production companies are able to tie in so that they don't feel cut adrift. I think that's a really important point.
Which is why SoHoNet's announcement today of free high-speed broadband for every producer in the country is marvellous news.
You heard it here first.
And
no, it's a really important point on the kind of pay-as-you-go utility model. Is when you look around at the trend we see everywhere now, from edit platforms, asset management companies, storage platforms, everyone's moving to that utility model of scaling up, scaling down. Data centers and telcos have been the slowest people to do it. But what's quite interesting, and we've seen, we work with 50 telcos globally, we've seen a change in that. We've actually starting to have conversations with telcos around, a monthly turn up, turn down. A data center said to me the other day, we'll rent you a rack for a day. Now, it's impractical. Why would you ever get a rack for a day? But they're actually listening because the market's moving that way. You walk around any trade show, and everyone's talking about pay-as-you-go utility models. So it's quite interesting. I think the next year or two will really bring them to the fore.
It'll also help you break out internationally as well, which you look at, everyone is like international. It not only that sort of smaller, more regional thing, but for us, with bigger, with sort of maybe we've got some cash to invest. It's okay. How do we collaborate with someone on the other side of the world very closely, without FedExing drives. We're digital, and then we put it on a drive in the same way as we would a tape and send it over. So
end-to-end digital.
Yes.
I mean, some of the other things that I've seen on the technology side is there's more of an adoption of open source software on top of the the framework itself, and that's becoming a major trend generally within the industry. People reusing or trying to use software which has been obviously developed by a large group of people, and you all get the advantage of that, which is really great. Excellent. Okay, so I think we might have just a few minutes of some questions to the audience. Does anyone have any questions for our panel? Yes, Johnny.
To Claire, I'm a production manager.
Good man.
Yes, good man. And actually, it's quite interesting because you have to keep a very open mind oneself when planning a show, taking on board the new technology, how much money you have, and most importantly, the mindset of the creators you're actually working with as to whether they will take things forward with you and go with it, or whether, no, they want to play it very conservatively. And really, that is the guiding light in many respects. And it is quite a bit of a problem.
It's a paradox, isn't it, that actually that creatives are very conservative
Oh, yes.
because they fear damage to
Couldn't
their
agree
product.
more. And your point is so true. The lack of collaboration, and I reckon to take a very broad view on things, one has to, I think, the way one works. But the lack of collaboration, because it's each their own little petty empire, and to break into that and open up the mind on that is actually often very difficult. Interesting thought. One other thing I'll just throw out to the panel. When I'm planning a show, I always start at the very end of post, delivery, and then work backwards. And it sort of works that way. I think it's a much easier way to work.
You're in a minority.
I know I am. I know I
It's
am,
good
but
to
I know
hear.
it works.
But
It works.
yeah.
I've done it a few years.
So you know, if a particular director says to you that they want to use a particular camera that you know is going to be very tricky to take through post, you know, its output will be very tricky to take through post, would you try and dissuade them?
Yes, I would. I'd say, yes, fine, well, let's go along. It might be the latest fantastic gizmo, and it's tried and tested. The DOP likes it, but often, and this is the case, it's a broad generalization, DOP loves the work once they're on set, but actually they don't think beyond the end of their contract, and post begins. And no, I would certainly persuade them otherwise. Yeah, very much so.
Interesting.
Anyway, sorry, I've talked enough.
Okay, any other questions? There's this chap here.
Hi there, Doug Garside. I work in post-production as well. It's a comment as much as a question, really. Regarding sort of production equipment, typically cameras, as you said, Sony are always going to tell you that they've got the best codec, as Panasonic are equally going to tell you that they've got the best codec. But to take a case in point, the Arri Alexa, for example, they chose to go with a post-production codec in the form of Apple ProRes, and it's proven hugely, hugely popular and very, very accessible for production staff because they can take it straight off a shoot and give it to pretty much any post-production unit who can deal with it in its raw format, and that's how it'll go through a post-production pipeline. So while it might be difficult to convince camera producers that standardising, surely they'd be able to see in some way that there is an advantage there because people will start to use that equipment if it provides those kind of workflow advantages.
And I think what you've got to think about as well, I mean, it happened when I was at the BBC, that a cameraman's a luxury. And a lot of times you've got to shoot in AP, you've got to shoot in PD, you've got to shoot in researcher, you've got lots of people who you know, are going to have to handle the kit that's that they can. You know, I wouldn't want to be given some of these things and try and work it, and you know, and by any stretch of the imagination. So I think also some of the budget restrictions sort of will generate some of the decision, or will make some of the decisions for you with regards to exactly where you're going to be able to pitch with at the acquisition stage of the kit that you're able to use, which is important.
I think you're right. Just you know, the Alexa, to be fair to Arri, as we all know, you know, that they completely nailed it to some extent, with not only in terms of the performance of the camera, but they thought long and hard about how they were going to deliver it, you know, and you're absolutely right about some of the other manufacturers who didn't see past that first bit, but they learned. Arri did an awful lot of market research for that camera. It's well known. You know, they spent years talking to people about it, and it, you know, the proof's in the pudding. You know, 90% of drama you see on the telly now is probably shot on the Alexa, and Skyfall, of course. So, but they didn't use ProRes for that, I don't think, did they, David?
Okay. Any other questions? Well, I think we've got time for one more.
It's one for you, Mark, actually. I've delivered a AS11 to Channel 5. It was one of the first ones. It was a bit bumpy to start with, but got there in the end. By the time we get to October 2014, is there going to be faster, more efficient codecs and formats by the time we've actually got to that point? Are we always chasing our tail in a way?
So do you mean in the transcode that goes at the end of the process?
Well, there's new codecs coming out all the time. So by the time we get to 2014, when everyone's delivering an AS11, are the manufacturers bringing out
Okay,
faster,
will
more efficient
we have
ones?
moved on? Will
Yeah.
AVCI 100 already be out of date? You mean?
Yeah.
Oh, I see what you mean. Okay, possibly. I'd probably not by then, but I'd take the point of your question. I don't think we should necessarily assume that the DPP standard is going to be something that's going to be static. I don't think it will be at all. I think it'll it'll keep moving, and I think the codec will probably keep moving with time. And but the important thing in a way is not. I think one shouldn't get too fixated on the particular DPP standard right now, related to that particular date. I mean, obviously people are a bit, because it's a real thing that's really happening. But what's significant is that we've now got this mechanism for agreeing amongst broadcasters how they're going to do things, so that any subsequent changes can be coordinated and organised and communicated, and we've got the means of working with the post-production community and the production community and so forth. And then the other thing is that, to me, actually, almost the more important aspect of the DPP common delivery standard is around the metadata as much as around the codec. It's in establishing that principle that we have this sort of minimum metadata set that every broadcaster is comfortable with, because that could be a whole separate panel session in some other place in the universe talk about
I think
metadata in the next few years.
Yeah,
It's going to be huge.
You're right. Part of the grief is that as we sit here today, it's not that easy to generate, and the tools are starting to come on stream now, etc., etc. But it is only one piece in the jigsaw, the whole codec issue, and Mark's absolutely right, and that the codec piece is one small part actually of the whole effort that's gone in, and it'd be very easy for the DPP to now say, oh well, we'll now also slot in another codec at appropriate time. The amount of work and effort that has gone into getting to where they've got now, and it is a line in the sand, there's no doubt about that, it's a line in the sand, but there's actually there's a proper structure there now about taking this whole thing forward, and yes, AS11 is some people would say is not perfect, and other way, we could say, well, let's just deliver it all in ProRes and everybody would be a lot happier. ProRes isn't a standard actually, so it wouldn't be a good thing to do that, but Mark's right, the mechanism is there, that's the important thing, and the metadata piece, the other piece that there's still work being done on now is the next big job is about the actual delivery mechanisms underneath for all the broadcasters, and that's not there yet, and that's going to be the next published work, isn't it? I understand. Those are the big things. I think the codec, is a bit tricky at the moment, and the manufacturers are all falling over themselves to say we can do AS11, etc. But it is only a small piece at the moment, and it will be messy, for a bit, I think.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you very much, panel. I think one of the things in terms of conclusions I draw from this, you can't have a digital end-to-end workflow in isolation, which may sound really obvious, but the other thing is to consider obviously your internal infrastructure, external, and obviously your connectivity. And thank you very much for your time.